Welcome to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, an IFS-informed trauma recovery coach. This show features interviews from guests all around the world as they share their impactful stories and deliver hope and inspiration through their personal post-traumatic growth. We explore and discuss resources and coping strategies to support the survivor community to thrive in their own healing journeys. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, and today I have with me, fun fact, an old friend of ours. She's a grown woman now, Miss Zaria Johnson, who I've known since I think you were probably 10 years old, which is funny because you're aging beautifully and I'm getting younger, so I don't know how this is working.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Thank you so much for being here. Zaria Johnson is a graduate of Spelman College, where she obtained her bachelor's degree in women's studies. She currently attends Columbia University in New York, getting her master's in public health with a concentration in health policy and management. She has conducted multiple research studies on the experiences of the BIPOC community in healthcare, studying the roots of biased treatment and how it relates to the disparities that we witness today. She is especially interested in Black maternal and reproductive health and the mortality and morbidity that Black mothers inevitably face when seeking care. In her research studies, she has interviewed numerous practicing physicians, celebrity doctors, including one who's made an appearance on Good Morning America, and mothers who have fallen victim to medical trauma. She has worked with an organization in DC known as the Mama Toto Village as a social justice intern, where she has assisted reformative meetings with the Children's National Hospital and helped create policy proposals to combat maternal health disparities. She's also an advocate for the community-based care and is currently in training to become a doula in efforts to improve the birth experiences of BIPOC women. So welcome, Zaria. Thank you for being here today. So first things first, to our listeners who might not know, we're going to use the word BIPOC a lot today, BIPOC, called BIPOC. It is Black and Indigenous people of color. And so that kind of puts that whole gamut around the community that we're specifically talking about today. So Zaria and I have come together, just a little intro on our important topic today. We're both very passionate about this topic. Many of you know I'm a little slightly obsessed with generational trauma. Throughout 2023, my main educational focus, although I am going to be working on healing trauma through somatics, like I've talked about in a lot of other episodes, one of the other educational focuses for me this year is going to be on the importance and the impact of fetal trauma. Now, what this looks like for fetal trauma and maternal trauma, right, is very different. This could even just be the biomom's unhealed trauma. It could be abuse within the relationship while pregnant. This looks like fetuses that are conceived outside of the mother's consent. Maybe a teen girl that's kicked out of her home for being pregnant. Any women that are experiencing homelessness, drug and alcohol misuse during their maternity. There's this whole slew, and the effects that has on the fetus is huge. So today, one of the highlights that Zaria and I have collaborated with to bring to the forefront is specifically going to be maternity and medical trauma. And this carries a much higher risk for Black women and others in the BIPOC community. So we are talking about here, not a third world country, right here in the United States. We are talking about, yes, today, 2023, which just happens to be, we didn't plan this, but it happens to be MLK Day. In 2023, we are not talking about 100 years ago. Black women suffer much more due to a lot of contributing factors we're going to get into. So today, we just want to share this with you. We want to educate BIPOC and non-BIPOC together. We want to help people find support if this is something they're experiencing or have, and just learn together how we can diminish the risk to Black and brown women that's going on right now. So Zaria, thanks for joining me. I'm gonna hand it right over to you to dive in. I'd love for you to just start like right at the beginning with some of the history. How did we get to this place where there's so much maternal racism and medical discrimination still in 2023 here?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I think it's really appropriate to be talking about this on a day that acknowledges history and just to be able to dive into the medical history of the United States and things that we are still seeing today. So, thank you for bringing awareness to this and bringing me here. So, but yeah, to understand where we are today, we have to look back and understand our history. So the history of medical and maternal trauma is really rooted in slavery. So Black enslaved birth givers were victims of medical experimentation. So for medical research purposes, slaveholders would often provide physician services for enslaved women for a very cheap price, for like $3 per enslaved woman per year. So medical research was done at the Black birth givers' expense, operating on them without anesthesia a lot of times. Through this experimentation, they were praised for their endurance and stoicism of basically being able to withstand the surgeries. So some of these conditions drove these slave birth givers to suicide or resulted in other medical conditions such as excessive heatings, malnutrition, or physical aggression. So there's this book called Medical Bondage, which is basically the history and of race and gender and the origins of American gynecology, which dives into the really like unfiltered, raw, horrific origins of gynecology, and which is basically based on the surgical experiments of these Black birth givers and what they experienced at the beginning. And these medical professionals really did believe that they possessed this superhuman strength. Like, and to justify it was often backed by religious beliefs where they would reference like Genesis in the Bible and claimed that, oh, these enslaved women were outside of Eve's painful childbirth trait since they technically weren't human. So one notable figure is J. Marion Sims, who he's considered like the father of gynecology. Like, he did a lot of these experiments, and it got to the point where even his colleagues didn't want to be in the room because it was so bad. So they were relying, the enslaved people were basically supporting each other through those things. So once the importation of slaves was abolished, then they were like, okay, we got to hurry up and get these women to continue to breed more slaves, which is where the breeder kind of stereotype evolved. So their value was then placed on how much they could produce. And there's this medical journal, The Natural History of Human Species, that quotes, American dark races bear tortures insupportable to the white man. So this really perpetuated the stereotypes that Black birth givers have a high pain tolerance and can basically reproduce faster and recover faster than a white birth giver. So, but they were not seen as mothers though, like that was taken away from them. And they were more seen as like machines to produce rather than caregivers, or their medical care was not valued. So then there was the sterilization laws in the 1930s, which was basically forced sterilization through hysterectomies, and it was often performed without consent. And they were basically considered invaluable. So they tried to control the population of Black people through forced sterilization on these Black birth givers. So all of these factors and trauma that has perpetuated and lasted through these generations from a deeply rooted, painful history is basically made way for the continued biased treatment based on those stereotypes in the medical system and disparities for BIPOC birth givers that what they experience today.
Wow. It's it's such an eye-opening history, of course, and it's difficult to hear it, but to recognize that it's actually still alive via generational trauma today. You talk about this in your May 2020 research paper, and you really kind of dig into, I mean, that you're not just giving an opinion, you are sharing what has been found in actual medical texts, actual published journals from medical professionals. I mean, you're using words like breeders, of course, with these high pain tolerances or no pain tolerance. They don't feel pain. They were also viewed as very hypersexual Jezebels, right? Who, like you said, undeserving of motherhood. These quotes are so horrible to even say or think, but how does this impact that ongoing medical care here in 2023 for the BIPOC community?
Yeah. So I would say that these terms, although they originated from slavery and even prior to that, I would say European exploration and sort of this admiration of like Black birth givers' bodies and their supposed superhuman strength. I would say that they have remained stagnant and contributed to biased treatment today. And I think it has resulted in four things. And the first is disproportionate treatment. So, with the stereotype that these Black women possess medical super bodies and can withstand more pain, they are less likely to be prescribed pain medication during labor. So, there's this really good article by AIMC titled How We Fail Black Patients in Pain. It basically says half of white trainees today, half of white medical trainees today believe that there are myths that Black people have thicker skin or less sensitive nerve endings than white people. So I think it's 40% first and second year medical students today still endorse this belief. So there are many sources and numerous settings that found that African American patients were 22% less likely than white patients to receive any pain medication. So this becomes more pronounced during labor in a very intense process, when Black birth givers are less likely to be believed about the pain they're experiencing, or they're just less prioritized. So, which leads me to the second point, is that Black birth givers are less likely to be believed that they're in pain, which leads to disproportionate outcomes, which one story is Kira Johnson. Kira Johnson she was a very healthy mother. She had a scheduled C-section. Everything was laid out. She arrived to the hospital. They did her C-section, and she was presumed to be fine. And then a few hours later, she was experiencing pain in her abdomen that was getting worse. And so once her husband, Charles Johnson, noticed some blood in her catheter, then he was like, alerted the doctors and begging them to come and check her out. And it wasn't until 10 hours later that they came back and conducted an emergency surgery on her, and found that while they were doing the C-section, they had accidentally nicked her bladder, which caused internal bleeding. So she had been bleeding for 10 hours without medical intervention, which was a very preventable cause. And she unfortunately passed away from that. So just to show that is the priority level that most Black women experience when they're expressing like, I'm in pain type of thing. So, and then I would say that this also leads to distrust, because then it's like, well, they're not going to believe me. And so they then prolong, like many Black birth givers, expectant mothers then prolong seeking medical care, because they know these facts, they see these stories, and they know they're not going to be believed. So in my research, I talked with expectant mothers and birth givers, and they basically were saying that they were afraid to seek care and basically prolong the process, or just were refraining from white physicians, or just took a lot of things into account that white women might just not even consider, which they would usually wait till like the third or fourth trimester, which, as a mother, the first few months is very critical to identify underlying conditions. So this is dangerous, which then contributes to the disproportionate outcomes. So yeah. And then I would say lastly that it affects access, because of bias toward these stereotypes and bias toward Black birth givers being breeders or hypersexual beings. Their care is not prioritized because they are seen unnecessary, or you're undeserving. And often when they walk into an office, there are assumptions already being made, like they're hypersexual beings or addicts or reliant on government assistance. And all of these kind of are deterrents to healthcare providers, which is deeply rooted in systemic racism, where there's access inequity, the care is not equal, and therefore the access is unequal. So I think that, it basically leads to all of those things.
It makes so much sense to me why the BIPOC community would have a distrust in the medical professionals that are supposed to be saving their lives and saving their baby's life. And then of course that leads to maybe not even coming forward and not getting the care that you actually deserve. So the trauma here is astonishing. And I think it's really important to just take a pause here, and just think about generational trauma, right? So even if this hasn't specifically happened right now to you. You haven't ever experienced this in the medical community, but you're a BIPOC person and you're saying, well, this isn't even my story, but why do I still have this fear? This is where generational trauma comes into play. So, on MLK Day, Civil Rights Day today, right? But slavery was only abolished 160 years ago. This is only a handful of generations ago. And during that handful of generations, even though slavery ended, we had all the micro racism and all of the segregation that happened there, right? So only one or two generations, and we're still in systemic racism. We're still in microaggressive racism, right? So we're still in that. We're moving farther away, but all of these generations, you're coming. So the children's children who are coming from slave populations don't necessarily have every one of these experiences in their body, but they have the after effects and the traumatic epigenetics that come through their hearts, their spirits, their minds, their bodies. And so, just I would like to encourage anyone who's watching who doesn't understand generational trauma, epigenetics, and how DNA is bled through. There's generational healing coming as well, but right now we're talking about generational trauma. So there's Mark Wolyn's book, It Didn't Start With You. Stephanie Fu has a book called What My Bones Know. Any information you can get, please. I know we love this subject of generational trauma. I know not everybody does, but you will be super surprised to learn the research that has been done. Of course, they have used slaves' ancestry down the line, and they have also used Holocaust survivors, the ancestry down their line as well for this research. And the things that Holocaust survivors' great grandchildren are experiencing that doesn't make sense to their even personal story. But then you have the BIPOC people giving birth in the maternity world, in the medical world, still actually experiencing actual trauma now, along with the rest of their heritage that's still in their bones, in their body. So I just want to implore people to please do a little bit of research on that, because what we're talking about here is the after effects of that. Just coming back to our overarching topic now of Black women's maternal and medical care, right? What does this look like now in 2023? What is this like ongoing experience of Black women in America? Do they have rights? Do they know that they can express their voice and choice? How are they able to find good fetal and maternal care without being placed in this high risk situation of experiencing discrimination and racism?
Yeah. Well, one thing is like, well, stop being racist, but it's
Number one,
so
yep.
it's right.
Let's do that.
Right.
Let's do that today.
So
That is a thing that people actively, great
yes,
takeaway. That is
yes,
something people can actively do today. Yes,
yes,
yes. Amen.
yeah, the individual work. But yeah, I would say that one thing that many um BIPOC birth givers, when they walk in seeking treatment, they're not aware of their rights as patients. They're walking into maternal and medical care. They're not aware, either because of trauma or miseducation, they're not aware of their rights as patients. And it's shown that even like 1 in 10 Black women hesitate seeking medical care. That's a lot. That's a lot. So for so long, I feel we have been conditioned to believe that we don't have control over our own bodies. So, for example, there's many people are unaware that there's such thing as patient advocates, where their job is to literally communicate with doctors, find legal help, work with insurance companies, etc. And a lot of times, like the barriers, like health literacy or medical jargon, is like a communication barrier between the patient and the medical professional, which is why that mediator becomes necessary to help inform and support the patient toward the right decision for their body. So I think because of the generational distrust in the medical system, they are hesitant to seek this because what they've been told is right for so long is sometimes wrong. So at the end of the day, the message that I have for BIPOC birth givers is that you have the right to your own body and experience. And I would say, in my experience as a doula, which for listeners who don't know is essentially a trained birth assistant that follows the mom from pregnancy to delivery and can act as an advocate during that delivery process for the mother, and be a mediator between mother and care provider. So I have seen instances where BIPOC mothers take control of their birth by they interview their medical team ahead of time to kind of build that trust. And if not, then they have something to go back towards. If something happens the day of, where, oh, we have this doctor coming in for you, they have this reference like, oh, these were the birth givers demands, like we have to go back to that. So they walk in with a plan and you have full control over that whole plan. It comes down to, oh, I want the lights this dim, or I want this, or I want a full natural birth, I don't want, or I want pain medication, or that type of stuff. And I would also say that there is such thing as trauma informed care, where you basically have control over the room. Like I would, I I don't want to smell this smell. I don't want to see this. And I only let a certain number of people in the room, or I would rather not have men in the room. And that's very apparent the whole time. There was signs on the doors, there's on your paperwork. It's a whole training that these doctors are obligated to go through. So in that instance, in trauma informed care instance, you have control over the whole situation. No touching without consent, et cetera, et cetera. So that is also another right that BIPOC women have and can employ. So on a surface level, that's what you can do, is come in with a plan, and you have rights to that plan that are protected under policy. And another thing is that under policy, you're also protected. If you are denied pain medication, ask for that in writing and describe why. You have a voice, which under policy is protected. And at the end of the day, the patient, care provider, and mediator, we're all on the same team. So advocating that and stepping into that and knowing that is beneficial. So again, I'm an advocate for community-based models of care. So seeking a doula and a midwife is proven to significantly improve birth outcomes, whether it's alleviating that stress and hypertension from generational trauma, or just stepping into it with fear, or any trauma that was lasting from pre-birth. Then that has significantly alleviated it, having that birth assistant from pregnancy to delivery. And they're less likely to experience a birth complication, less likely to have a low birth weight baby, more likely to breastfeed. All these benefits come with a doula, and usually result in a more positive childbirth experience. And so I've seen Black birthers increasingly seeking out doulas and finding out how to access those community-based models of care, having home births, etc. So I would also recommend that medical professionals do the work, right? Like start educating yourselves on racism within the medical field, because this is just frankly not the stuff that will be taught in medical school. This is a personal responsibility to combat excessive medicalization and victimization. So I would say it's all those things.
That's a lot. So tell me, you said doula, you said that there's patient advocacy and there's trauma informed care doctors and other medical professionals. How do we have access to this? Is it through, calling the insurance company? Is this something that's available at every doctor's office, every hospital, or do you have to go to a birthing center, a special trauma informed place? Like, where is this actually available?
Yes, I would say it's very readily available. I think through a birth center, through your hospital, they are responsible to provide you for that care, and that's protected under policy. That all of that is. So if you have this plan of what you want to do, you and arrive to the hospital with this, then they basically have to provide you with those accommodations. So
Okay. Yeah, it's almost like disability rights, right? Like they have to. So there is actual laws protecting that you have access to this if you have specifically asked for it. So I imagine this is very, very helpful if there's been sexual trauma. Going into a birthing situation is very scary. There's a lot of pain associated in the pelvic area, right? So I know that trauma informed care there, even a trauma trained advocate there would probably be very helpful. But I love that these doctors have the access and the ability and obligation for trauma informed care. So the importance there is I mean, I love that there's trauma informed everywhere, but trauma informed and trauma trained, of course, we know are different. There was an episode about that if you're not sure. But I mean, even in yoga classes, there's trauma trained yoga classes so that they won't come up behind you and adjust you without you
Mhm.
knowing. So this is, if this is available in the yoga world, in the, if this is
Yeah.
available in the spiritual world, it is available
Right.
for you in the medical world. You're talking about the policy, so I just want to jump in. So I know you've done work with a nonprofit that worked with Congress. So tell us what's being done systemically here. How can we as a whole, BIPOC, non-BIPOC, how can we raise the awareness? What organizations are doing this good work? Where do we go to help in this advocacy?
Yeah, I worked with Mama Toto Village, where we basically compiled research and helped to inform Congress on the statistics that were happening in maternal health. What is being done right now, like the bills that are in the works right now, is most prominently is the Momnibus Act, which is basically a Black Maternal Health Act, where they will make investments in the social determinants of health, meaning things like housing, transportation, and nutrition will be more accommodated. And they're going to expand coverage to include those community-based models of care. So the doulas, the midwives, that will be more widely recognized so that your insurance will cover it. And that's a pretty prominent problem right now, is that, oh, I want a midwife, but my insurance doesn't cover it, or that it's just too costly. And for many trauma survivors, that's not so much of an option. And so they're trying to expand that to be more accessible. And there will also be data collection improvements through that, which will be a significant help to understanding the patients and just being more informed about treating these patients. Um, and one of the branches of that bill is actually the Kira Johnson Act, which was created after Kira Johnson. So it takes a multi-level approach. So on a community level, a healthcare provider level, and a direct intervention within healthcare facilities. So they're doing bias training, they're increasing educational programs for expectant birth givers. They're also doing interventions with healthcare providers. So this will significantly reduce the hopefully the bias and the maternal health outcomes that we're seeing. And this also inevitably involves reproductive justice, which is under attack right now with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So when it comes down to it, it's come to the responsibility of the states and representatives to do the work. So right now, the advocacy groups that are doing this work are like National Birth Equity Collective and the Black Mamas Matter Alliance. So those are very important advocacy groups that are kind of continuing to advocate and push this act to be enacted. So that their continued support is really important. Um, and actually, listeners can go and sign the petition. If you go to look up the Monmouth Act, you can sign the petition for it to get more attention, for it to be pushed in Congress. And also, I would just say supporting participating organizations that are advocating for this act to be passed, such as Senator Cori Bush or representatives such as Alma Adams and things like that. Continued votes, continued support of that. And as BIPOC, I would also say that we have to educate ourselves on our rights in our body autonomy and start breaking those generational curses and trauma by actively caring for ourselves in our mental health and understanding our bodies and the rights and control that we have over them. And as non BIPOC, I would also say educate yourselves on the systemic oppression that has led to today. And there's a lot of undoing that needs to be done. And this bias training can only go so far. And so when you're actually doing the work to understand the root of these problems, understanding systemic racism and where you stand in that will make a significant difference.
And if I could just add, first of all, you gave just a lot of info there. Don't worry, we are going to have all of this. I'm going to have all of these links in the show notes, as well as some resources we're going to talk about in a minute. But just to kind of take a step back, and I just want to also challenge people, when I talk about generational trauma, I do not necessarily just mean for the BIPOC community. I mean for the non-BIPOC, right? So you have to know what is in your bones as well. And I am coming from, as obviously non-BIPOC, I am coming from roots where some parts of my family were actually slave owners, and remembering that that was only a couple of generations ago. And do I hate it? Yes. Do I wish it didn't happen? Absolutely. If I was there, do I think I would do anything different? God, I hope so, but I don't know, right? I don't know what it would have been like to live back there. And so remembering that is part of my generational bones. That is part of my blood, my heart, my mind, my spirit, because that's how epigenetics work. So taking a good hard look in the mirror to say, if you are non-BIPOC, if you are struggling with some ideas, if you are kind of agreeing with some of these things, well, yeah, I've heard that too about Black women and pain tolerances. We need to recognize where that came from in ourselves, because epigenetics works on both sides, right? And so doing your own individual work is super, super important. So I really appreciate all of these great organizations that are doing the work and all of these anti-racism movements that are happening, because it's not just about, diluting the bias. We need to make the bias disappear, right? There needs to actually be equity in the access, in how people are thought about, looking at people as humans, as individuals, right? With autonomy. We all know that we are diminishing stigmas right now. We are having raw, open, honest conversations about horrible things that have happened and horrible things that we're trying to undo. And resources is the name of the game on this podcast. So, where can we go for for further education? What books can we read? What websites are available? How can we find more information about doulas? Is this just, should we call insurance companies? Should we do some research on where these are? How can we raise awareness? Where should we be donating and contributing our time and energy and money?
Yeah, so some organizations that I would recommend looking up and donating to are first the Mama Toto Village that I did work for. They do excellent work in DC, working with policy and also just raising awareness and providing educational programs for local mothers and also connecting them with doulas and things like that. So I would say excellent resource to support and donate to. Also, for Kira for Moms, which is also connected to Kira Johnson. Her husband Charles Johnson is doing a lot of frontline work and sitting with Congress and doing these things to push the Momnibus Act and push things in Congress to be done. So you can also donate to that. They're making a lot of congressional change. Black Mamas Matter Alliance, also a good place to donate to, I would say. To find doulas. Some resources would be the National Black Doulas Association and the Black Doula Project. You can go on those websites and look for yourself there. If you would rather be matched with a BIPOC person, you can go through your own provider and just be asked to match with a doula. But if you have preferences and you would rather take control and have it in your own hands, those are good resources to look for. And also through the Black Doula Project, you can also apply for a grant to cover those doula fees. So those are really great resources as far as searching for a midwife. And I would also say that for books, I really loved the Medical Bondage book by Deidre Cooper Owens, The Race, Gender, and Origins of American Gynecology, just to understand the roots of all of this. I would also say Killing the Black Body by Dorothy Roberts. I use her stuff all the time. She's really, really, really great. And then Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington is a really good book as well. So there's also birth trauma counseling available, trauma surrounding pre-pregnancy, delivery, and postpartum, and a specific therapy also called birth trauma therapy, which you're probably also aware of. But yeah, I would say those are great places to start.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much, Zaria, for joining me today. I will have all of this info that we just talked about. It's going to all be linked up in the show notes so people can click on things, donate to places, read some books, get educated, and yeah, let's bring a voice to this very important topic. So, Zaria Johnson, thank you for joining me today. It was great chatting with you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening or watching this episode of Trauma Survivorhood. For more info, show notes, and links, check out the episode guide below. Until next time, be well, survivors.